Hello everybody, Chess Coach Tendai here. We are going to talk about the rook. The rook, not the castle. The rook, that's the proper term for this piece. The rook may move any number of squares horizontally or vertically, so long as no piece is blocking its path. The rook may move any number of squares horizontally or vertically, so long as no piece is blocking its path. Okay. Let's now show the possible squares that the rook can move to. Let's start with horizontal movement. I'm going to show the squares that the rook can move to. The rook is on the e4 square. The rook can move to f4, can move to g4, can move to h4. h4 is just the square where the letter h meets the number 4. Let's go to the left. The rook on e4 can move to d4, can move to c4, b4, and a4. So this rook on this square on e4 can move to any number of those squares. The rook can also move vertically. Let's go up. The rook can move to e5, e6, e7, e8. The rook can also move down to e3, e2, e1. These are the possible squares that the rook on e4 can move to. Right. Once again, the rook may move any number of squares horizontally or vertically, so long as no piece is blocking its path. Okay, now let's look at capture. So we're going to clear the board and we go back with our rook on e4. If there was a bishop on the h4 square, I'm going to put a knight on a4. I'm going to put a pawn on e2, and I'm going to put a queen on e8. This rook on e4 can capture the bishop. Right? Let's go back. It can move horizontally to the right, it can move horizontally to the left. This rook can capture the knight on a4. Okay, this rook can go down, can capture the pawn on e2. Let's go back. This rook can capture the queen on e8. The rook moving horizontally or vertically. Now, what if there was a pawn or a piece of the same color as the rook? So let's put a pawn on g4, for instance. Let's put a knight on b4, for instance. This rook, can it move to this square, to h4? Can this rook move to h4, for instance, like that? No, it cannot, because it is blocked in its path by the pawn on g4. So this rook can only move to this square, f4, if it is moving horizontally in the same direction. It's now blocked by the pawn on g4. Okay, let's put the rook back. The same goes with the left-hand side. This rook cannot move to that square, a4, where I've just put the rook, because it is blocked by its own knight. Okay, knight of the same color. This rook can only go as far as moving to c4 next to the knight. It cannot go over the knight. The rook cannot jump over pieces. Okay, very important. Now let's just make sure we remember how the rook moves. We said it can only move horizontally or vertically. So let's say there was a knight on g6, and then we put a knight on b5. Let's put a bishop on e1. Oh, let's suppose to be a black bishop, so we put a black bishop. Which of these pieces can the rook capture? Can the rook capture the knight on g6? Can the rook capture the knight on b5? Can the rook capture the bishop on e1? Now the knight on g6 is in a diagonal, same diagonal as the rook. So can the rook capture? No, because the rook only moves horizontally or vertically. So the rook cannot capture the knight on g6. Just to make sure we know the knight we're talking about is this one. I've just removed the knight. I'm putting it back. Can the rook on e4 capture the knight on b5? No, because they are not on the same file or rank. Okay, I've not been using that term consistently. The rook can capture the bishop because it moves vertically. They are on the same file. The rook and the bishop are on the same file. So yes, this rook can capture the bishop like that. All right, let's go back. Let's repeat a few things. This rook on e4 can move horizontally along the same rank. So it can move horizontally from e4, it can go to f4, g4, h4. It can also move to d4, c4, b4, and a4. The rook is moving horizontally along the rank. The rook on e4 can also move vertically up or down the file. So the rook on e4 can go up to e5, e6, e7, e8. The rook can also come down to e3, e2, e1. That's in terms of the movement. The rook may move any number of squares horizontally or vertically, so long as no piece is blocking its path. Okay, so we're going to clear the board, and then we put the rook on e4. And we said once again that the rook cannot jump over pieces. So let's say the rook was surrounded by pawns all around like this. This rook would not be able to move because it is trapped by pieces of the same color. All right. Let's just clear those pawns. And we come back to the rook. Ladies and gentlemen, that is how the rook moves. See you in the next one.